Tuesday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Hope you are having a good afternoon. Browns will start training camp next week out in West Virginia at the Greenbrier. Andrew Berry in the front office busy. Late yesterday, they got an extension done with Dustin Hopkins. 3-year, $15.9 million contract makes him one of the top 5 highest paid players. He is now with the Browns through the 2027 season. Here are the 5 highest paid kickers. Justin Tucker at $6 million. Jake Elliott also at $6 million. Matt Gay, 5.62. Graham Gano, 5.5. Dustin Hopkins and Fairbairn at $5.3 million. Let's welcome in Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. Jeff, when you look at this, we don't know how the contract is structured yet. It could very well be structured so that they actually lowered the cap number this year and kind of tacked it onto the back end. Good news is Hopkins kicked well and was really key, and Browns rewarded him, and they have who they consider a reliable kicker locked up for three plus more years.
Well, I mean, there's a couple scenarios where you go with this. Look, the Browns tried to adjust the situation with the drafting of Cade York, who ironically enough is back with the Browns and will be in training camp with them. We all know it didn't work out. It started great, and one of the things, and we talked about it back then when it was, is don't have to rely on your rookie kicker. And all of a sudden, not this past season, but the year before, the Browns were trying to rely on their rookie kicker to bail them out a lot of ball games. Didn't work out for Cade York, and obviously he's had his little dalliance around the NFL with other teams, and now here he is back. Though I guess the Cade York revival tour is not going to happen. But everybody also then gave up such a stink that the Browns actually traded for a kicker. And then you had what Dustin Hopkins did last year for this team and his effectiveness. And, kickers, it's a weird progression. Sometimes it doesn't work out from day one. Sometimes it's a kicker nobody's ever heard of. And the next thing you know, he's kicking for a franchise for a decade or longer. But, D-Hop came in right away, took to the tricky wins in Cleveland, was very, very effective on the road, was huge, certainly in, the game-winning couple of kicks, but whether it was the game in Baltimore, the subsequent week against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and became one of their most effective weapons last year as far as putting points on the board. Did have to, deal with the injury, issue, which happened, ironically enough, in the first trip down to Houston. But the Browns were able to, find a guy and get that hole covered. And it's a big, big thing because you can't have a revolving door at kickers. We all understand you don't all have the Justin Tuckers of the world or the Jordan Elliott's of the world, the kicker for the Philadelphia Eagles. It just doesn't always work that way for every franchise. But when you find a guy who's getting it done, you don't want to have to go looking for another one, because just when you start looking for one, 2 weeks later, you could be looking for another one. D-Hop came in. It worked out really well for him. It worked out really well for the franchise. And, it's just a headache you don't need. If you know it's taken care of, then you can trust D-Hop. And certainly after the year he had last year, you find a way to make sure he's financially compensated, and you hope that he can basically reproduce what he did last season.
All right. I know you addressed this on the Locked On Browns podcast. Amari Cooper wants an extension. There's some things that are challenging from his aspect relative to the Browns. Analytic front, young wide receiver room that they want to see grow. Take us through that and kind of how you think those kind of factor into this contract situation with Amari Cooper.
There is a couple of ways to look at this. We all believe that Nick Chubb will be a part of this team at some point this season, but we all did feel at some point last year, even if Nick had stayed healthy and Deshaun had stayed wealthy, there was going to be basically the switching, the changing of the guard, if you will, where this was going to become an offense that was led and featured the arm of Deshaun Watson as opposed to the legs and the running ability of Nick Chubb. Sadly enough, we never really got to the point for either of those players where we saw that come to fruition. Nick leaving in week 2 and, Deshaun leaving, right after the Raven game and his season being ended there. But you think there could be a change in statistical output for Amari Cooper. If the Browns really, really throw the ball well, maybe Amari reaches the numbers he had the last couple of seasons. But you still want to make Jerry Jeudy a big part of this offense. And, with what David Njoku did last year, how many targets does that mean Amari Cooper is going to get this year? You have Tillman. You have Bell, who, found a way to contribute down the end last season. Big play against the Jacksonville Jaguars, had a great game to close out the regular season against Cincinnati Bengals. caught 7 passes, not a lot of yards against Houston in the playoff game. And then, of course, you drafted Jamari Thrash as well. There's a lot of guys to throw the ball to. So this could work two ways. Either the coverage focuses on Amari Cooper so the younger guys can prove themselves. And if the younger guys prove themselves, all of a sudden the coverage gets a little bit easier and a little bit lax as far as Amari Cooper, because you have to give the respect to everybody else. You factor in Jerry Jeudy, and there's going to be guaranteed targets. There's going to be manufactured targets for Jerry Jeudy. The Browns did not pay him this amount of money to just have him come in and to be labeled a wide receiver too. They think he's a guy that can give them solid production. But, we know that, the Browns have felt this way, under an analytic regime. This is why Nick Chubb played last season without any future money. Amari Cooper does not want to be in that position to play this season without any future money because, you saw what happened to Nick. So it's a way it can work for all parties. Amari Cooper, I don't think he's going to be as satisfied as he would like to be. Because as it goes on, the Browns believe there's going to be a growth path for Jerry Jeudy. They believe there's going to be a growth path for Cedric Tillman. So that doesn't mean, Amari Cooper's days in Cleveland are done this season or necessarily next season. But once you get to about 26, you think that, Jerry Jeudy may have gotten to the point where he established himself as a number 1 wide receiver or a strong number 2. Cedric Tillman possibly knocking on that door. You want to see what David Bell can give you for the last couple of years in his rookie deal. You certainly want to see what Jamari Thrash can give you. So it's a lot to be put in. I don't think the Browns are going to let Amari, for what he did the last 2 years, play this year, and basically have a lame duck contractual season. I think the Browns are willing to make it worth his while. I think just Amari and his camp are going to have to understand it just might not be the big payday that they are hoping for.
This one's from Yardbarker. One off-season roster ad for each NFL team that fans should be excited for the Browns, they say Jerry Jeudy. Cleveland made a strong effort to add receiving help in 3 consecutive off-seasons. Jeudy, their biggest addition this year, former Broncos first-round pick, has struggled to reach his potential, but he's still only 25. The other thing about that, they're judging him relative to other guys that were in that draft class that he came out in and where he was a first-round pick. It's kind of like people judge Jedrick Wills with the Browns.
One of the most difficult things with the wide receiver position, and as far as the draft is concerned, is fit and where you go, who's grooming you, and who you're playing with. Jerry Jeudy's first year, those quarterbacks were no longer around. His second year, Russell Wilson did not play well. Last year, Russell Wilson played a little bit more effective, but he certainly did not play like the Russell Wilson MVP, Super Bowl performer from the Seattle Seahawks that we all come to expect. So I do kind of, take issue, when people saying that, Jerry Jeudy has not reached his potential. If you put him in Kansas City, would the story have been different? If you had put him in Buffalo, would the story have been different? It's a lot of it comes down to, you can't throw yourself the ball is the old line that goes way back in the day. And look, Jerry Jeudy has had some drops at times. Certainly did miss a little time with Denver. But, I think it's a little unfair, like to say that maybe he's a failure. If you want to say maybe he's a little bit more of an incomplete, like we don't know just yet. I think that would be a more fair and accurate way to describe Jerry Jeudy at this point in career. But what we know is obviously the Browns loved him during his draft cycle. They tried numerous times to acquire him. The moment they acquired him, they did not hesitate. It was less than 2 weeks before they gave him a long-term deal. And if you look at his statistical output, you would have thought the deal was maybe a little bit more richer than maybe his statistical output deserved. And then a couple of weeks after, we started to see what more and more wide receivers were getting extended for. And all of a sudden, that deal looked a lot more favorable. Certainly, you're probably expecting a more general production than what Jerry Jeudy's career averages are to this point, which I certainly think are attainable. But, this could be a nice, thing here for the next few years and for, the post-Amari Cooper time in Cleveland for Deshaun Watson. And, this is, a Cooper maybe his one now, but it's nice to know that he probably, hopefully, has his number 1 of the future in Jerry Jeudy.
Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast, and I'm going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back.
Can you believe this new $1,000 tax-free scratch-off? $18,000, $1,000 winners? Another winner? Good thing I brought my check writing pens. You know what else is winning? My carpal tunnel syndrome. Wouldn't it be great for these guys if they could cash their tickets in online?
They can, with the Ohio Lottery app.
What? That's great! Wait, what's an app?
Attention shoppers, the Ohio Lottery's $1,000 tax-free $20 scratch-off is your best chance ever to win $1,000. And yes, you can cash it in online.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. Let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
How huge was Dustin Hopkins? I think he kicked, 5 or 6 50-yarders to help to win the game. It was close. If we can get that kind of production, well, of course we want touchdowns. But my main concern is the scheme. I like to see more of the guys with the speed, like Matt Landers, because he's 4'3" speed. Big guy. He can play tight end, too. He can fill in like you have your 3 tight ends with David Njoku, maybe even Cedric Tillman. He can be slash wide receiver tight end.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Jeff, we talked about Hopkins. If you show you can kick down at that stadium, long-term deal makes sense. Relative to the tight ends, we don't know what this scheme is going to look like. My sense is they're going to try to get it to look similar to what he was doing being Watson in Houston, where you identify matchups and you get the ball to him quickly. That's something Deshaun Watson did really well.
And I think that's one thing that maybe, and look, I'm guilty of it. And you guys know, I've talked a lot about, what are you doing at the tight end position outside of David Njoku? But if we learned anything about David Njoku last year, we learned that he's just not another general tight end. And, last year, maybe just last year, we saw truly what he is capable of. And it is. It's always been the line with David Njoku is he is too fast for linebackers and he is too big for defensive backs. So it becomes a coverage nightmare. You certainly got the full David Njoku experience in the first half of the New York Jet game last year. He's just running those crossers. And, once he was past the linebackers, up came the defensive backs and, 200-pound defensive back against a 245-pound tight end who runs a 4.6. He was either breaking the tackles or he was flat out beating them and extending plays for major yards. I think maybe part of what the issue is, they look and say, well, look, David's a gift. And we can't just say anybody else can go out there and do what David does, which is probably, what we all need to understand. There's not a lot of tight ends who have the vertical jump of a David Njoku. There's not a lot of tight ends that have the speed of a David Njoku. And, as he's, progressed and become more and more of a complete tight end, which is one of the things that's probably most underrated about David is, he got much better with his stance. He got much better as a blocker. But he's just a rare breed as far as athleticism in the tight end position and what he can bring you as far as his receiving aspect. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's more about finding the matchup that we think we can win. Whether it was Amari Cooper, whether it was the Jet game, and it was David Njoku just feasting on linebackers and safeties. You can't just think that you just say, okay, just because David Njoku's down, we're going to put the next tight end in. Well, the next tight end is certainly not going to have the DNA or the athletical makeup of David Njoku. So then it would just be, well, we'll start playing more wide receivers. And, as far as the running game, you hope the tight ends you do have, which maybe they don't just right now, can at least come in and be serviceable blockers. And then when you have to throw the ball, if you don't have David, you just start going with different matchups like a Cedric Tillman. The name Matt Landers seems to keep coming up. Probably a long shot, but you just want these guys that have a calling card, and you can certainly, as a head coach and certainly as an offensive coordinator, what you expect from Ken Dorsey, just kind of scheme guys open or scheme guys to say that this is the matchup we know should win on this given play, this given rep.
All right, this is from Yard Barker. 3 Browns who could have bounce backs 2024. Number 1, Deshaun Watson. When he's been on the field, he has underwhelmed, throwing 14 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Yeah, his numbers haven't been great. They are 8-4 in the 12 games he's played in. Nick Chubb, 28-year-old, may never return to being the same player he was and become the latest reason why the running back position is undervalued. But if anyone can make the comeback, it's Nick Chubb. Zadarius Smith, coming off a 10-sack campaign in 2022, disappointed with just 27 tackles, 5.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble in 2023. Still reasonable to expect him to step up his game heading into the second season with Cleveland, which is returning most of the players after boasting league's top defense in total yards allowed. I think all three of those guys could potentially come back. The Nick Chubb thing's interesting. You're starting to see him. You saw the squatting, 540 pounds. You see some of the movement, some of the things that he's doing, and I'm starting to think, well, he might be back sooner rather than later.
Well, the Nick Chubb thing is just difficult, because I think the Browns, it's going to be one of those things where, how much can he give you? Because to think about what he went through, and if you're the Browns, you're talking about 20 games, possibly 21 games this season. So if week one's your benchmark, do you think he's going to be able to give you 20 to 21 games, ideally, off of the injury he had last year? So I think that's why maybe the pullback is there and why maybe week one is not that realistic. Deshaun, it's just a question of, and look, and you guys know the way I feel. We've talked about this 100 times. 8-4, the record, the way he was playing, the games he was winning. That's kind of what mattered last year. And look, if Deshaun Watson went out there and won 12 games, nobody would be talking about the statistical output. They wouldn't care because obviously he did what he needed to do when it mattered, like that final drive against the Baltimore Ravens in Baltimore. And Zadarius Smith, it's a little bit different because, Zadarius Smith, we're talking about, maybe the wrong end of a prime age at a position. And, certainly came in and, maybe the 5.5 sacks isn't great. His pressure rate was better than that. And it's not for Zadarius Smith to come in and, compete with Miles sack for sack. Or I don't think the realization is even for Zadarius Smith to go out and give you a double-digit sack season. But it's, between himself, between Alex Wright, between Ogbah-Okoronkwo, I think maybe you'd say, hey, if we could get 20 out of those three, and you compare that to, Miles, 15, 16 that we're accustomed to year in, year out, that means between those four, you'd have 36, and you figure you piecemeal another 15 or more between everybody else on the roster. It becomes a really, really, solid number. But, Zadarius brings things that people don't, basically understand because it doesn't necessarily equate to stats. It is the pressure rate. It's the fact that he can rush from the inside. He can play the right side. He can play the left side. So there's a lot of factors. I think did people originally thought Zadarius Smith was going to give you a better statistical output last year? Yeah, I think that's probably fair to say. But looking at everything and understanding, there was a little missed time. It certainly played through some injuries because it always seemed like Zadarius Smith every fourth quarter of every game was a little dinged up. It's it's about maybe being the guy that's going to start to pass the torch here to Alex Wright. He will be the starter and he will be the leader in the beginning of the season. But it wouldn't be, shocking if that by the end of the season where he and Alex Wright were maybe in a 50-50 split with Ogbah certainly getting his share of reps between that those two aren't taking and certainly trying to get Miles a little bit more rest than we've ever been accustomed to. And it's not that Miles is just not that great, not that effective, but you want the one most closest to 100% version of Myles Garrett week in, week out. They've done a great job. I think the edge room has really, really developed well, and we haven't even gotten to talk about Isaiah McGuire yet, who should have a shot at certainly a decent amount of playing time here this year. But Zadarius is the one that probably has the toughest hill to climb because, he's starting to kind of maybe look father time eye to eye here a little bit as far as NFL players' time is concerned.
All right, before we go to break, this one's from Dog Pound Daily. 4 free agent departures the Browns will miss the most in 2024. Number 4, they go Nick Harris, center and guard. On the O-line, number 3, Mike Ford was a really good special teams player and a cornerback. Number 2, Harrison Bryant. Talked a little bit about the tight end. And number 1, Sione Takitaki, a linebacker who probably was underrated in his time with the Browns, maybe overlooked a little bit. I would be more concerned about Sione Takitaki if they didn't go out and sign Jordan Hicks.
I think, and I think we're going to get to this a little bit. Look, you have Jordan Hicks who could probably give you everything Anthony Walker gave you as far as being, that mentor, the guy who's going to make sure we're all sitting down, we're watching film, we're looking for tendencies, we're looking for tells. But Jordan Hicks is a better linebacker than Anthony Walker. which means he's certainly a better linebacker than Sione Takitaki as well. And it's not a knock on Sione Takitaki, because even when the Browns originally brought him in, the fact that he ended up being a starter for this team as the Sam linebacker, and then even ended up becoming a starter at the Mike position, I think he outseeded expectations in the Browns, that organization. And keep in mind, he wasn't brought in by the Andrew Berry regime. He was brought in by the old regime. He certainly exceeded any expectation that this franchise may have had for him as a day 3 pick. And the progression was certainly there. Certainly had the knack for some timely plays, a big interception return against the Eagles early in his career, a big interception against the Pittsburgh Steelers in the playoff win. But that's not the one. I don't think losing either Walker or Takitaki is going to be one that's going to have people up in arms, because if you truly get down to it in the brass tacks of it, Hicks is just a better player. He's a more established player. He's been around the league longer. He's played for successful franchises. It's kind of, and I've labeled it, and I will continue to say it, I think it was one of the unsung signings of the offseason for the Browns, and more than one unheralded ones, because he was just an absolute consummate professional.
Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast, and I'm going to step aside, take one more time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk about the defense and the linebacker position in particular. Sports for CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Jeff Lloyd from the Locked On Browns podcast. This is from Pro Football Network, 2024 NFL defensive rankings ahead of training camp. They go Jets 1, Browns 2, Steelers 3, Cowboys 4, 49ers 5, and Ravens 6. So 3 of the AFC North teams in the top 6. They say the Browns allowed the fewest yards in the NFL last season while finishing 6th in sacks. Cleveland's defense is on the rise, and the Browns added veteran linebacker Jordan Hicks in free agency. The other thing they added, Jeff, I think their defensive line is stronger by drafting Michael Hall Jr. and adding Quentin Jefferson to that defensive tackle rotation.
Oh, and you certainly brought in a player who's giving you a present in Quentin Jefferson. He's not a guy that's going to be out there with his hand in the dirt in 1st and 10, and obviously a guy you're going to look to make huge, stuffs in the run game. Quentin Jefferson's a really good pass rusher from the interior. But you look at Mike Hall, and you look at the way this defensive tackle room is, and you have, certainly Dalvin Tomlinson, who's, probably your top guy right now. And you're not even getting to see the whole Dalvin Tomlinson experience, because a lot of times when the Browns go to nickel or they go to dime, they're trying to get as many defensive ends on the field as possible. But Mike Hall it's the future. And you really think that Mike Hall is going to be that guy probably as soon as next season, which doesn't mean you don't have expectations for him to give some contribution this year. But he's the guy that should be that 3-tech going further. He is really, really good with his hands. The athleticism is there. He's been a very, very athletic young man his whole life, going back to his teen years out in Streetsboro. He's kind of like the belle of the ball, and what you're gonna be the future of that room. They've put a lot of effort into it, for years, and this is gonna be my 8th season now in full-on Cleveland Browns coverage. It just blew my mind, the lack of effort, the lack of chances that they just couldn't get quality interior defensive line play. The second you had Jim Schwartz agree to come be a defensive coordinator, that was going to be the thing that absolutely had to change the most. You look at his defenses and the players he's coaching, whether it's a Fletcher Cox, certainly whether it was a Jeffrey Simmons, he had some time, certainly down in Tennessee before he came to Cleveland. Albert Hainsworth, Ndamukong Suh, he's always wanted that guy on the interior, that 3 technique that can just blow up everything and really becomes just a disruptive force. It's the shortest path to getting into the quarterback, certainly is from the defensive tackle position. And that's certainly what the envision and the hopes are for a guy like Mike Hall Jr. And, it may be a little slow getting out of the gate because, Mike is relatively young. There's, a lot of guys nowadays are coming to the NFL at, 22, almost 23 years old. Mike only turned 21 about a month ago. But, he is certainly, what they think is going to be a big, big part of, the future of the Browns defensive line, and certainly their top dog probably by 2025 at the defensive tackle position.
So ESPN continued their ranking of position groups. This is based on votes from executive scouts and coaches. They did the top 10 off-ball linebackers. Fred Warner of the Niners is 1, Roquan Smith of the Ravens 2, Matt Milano of the Bills 3, Patrick Queen 4, Nick Bolton 5, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah of the Browns 6. NFC scout, tremendous athlete, runs like a corner, finally found his stride and played with confidence. NFC executive. Many of us scouts loved his ability coming out of the draft in 2021. We're concerned with his size, but he's overcome that. Makes plays all over the field. You can live with the lack of instincts in some areas because he's a playmaker with quick trigger to the ball. The other thing I would say, remember, that end of last year is when it really clicked. So a full year of Jim Schwartz kind of building him up and honing it a little bit. I think he's going to keep ascending. I really do.
I have no reason to believe that that's not going to be the path. And I actually kind of get a little chuckle there seeing Patrick Queen's name ahead of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Let's be honest, just because of a contract somebody signed with one team doesn't necessarily elevate the play you had. And a lot of what Patrick Queen did, and as successful as he was because of the guy ahead of him on that list, Roquan Smith. So, for Patrick Queen, let's see you do it, when you're supposed to be the guy, when you're supposed to be the man. Because Patrick Queen was drafted by the Baltimore Ravens to be the man. He wasn't. The Baltimore Ravens then went out and traded for Roquan Smith, which allowed Patrick Queen to be a much more effective player. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah has been the best linebacker on the team he's played for his first 3 seasons in the NFL. He is certainly, I like Jordan Hicks. I think he's a great player, but I think he's a more technical savvy player as opposed to where Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah is your playmaker. I know so many people are caught up in the Amari Cooper and the deal and the extension. I can tell you right now, from what I've been told, the more pressing matter is getting Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah's contract extension done. It is something that they want done quickly. They do not want to go to training camp without that satisfied. Jeremiah really, really stepped up. And, we all know that Jeremiah has probably had a little bit more on his plate here the last couple of days, certainly with the trial, around, the passing of his brother, the death of his brother, the murder of his brother. But he has really, really stepped up here. And there's some that have, I've gotten the opportunity to talk to that said, he was always a well-grounded kid. He was always a very, very well-focused kid. But, when that part of his life happened, it really, really just, took a guy who was 24 years old and shot him up to the fact where he carried himself like he was more like a 30-year-old guy, a 31-year-old guy. And his play really grew with it. Certainly the Jim Schwartz defense did not hurt. The fact that they finally addressed the defensive tackle and he was allowed to play a little bit more clean, because it's a really, really difficult to play with instincts and just say, I know what's happening and I'm going to go blow it up. I know the guard's going to block down. I'm going to beat him in the spot. I'm going to get to the backfield. It's all well and great to know what you think is going to happen and be pretty sure what's going to happen. But when, your D tackle's getting pushed into you as you're trying to ascend into the hole and you're not making the play that you thought you were going to be able to make, it all needs to work together. It all needs to, a good friend of mine named Matt Waldman, he uses a great phrase, it's got to be a band and it's got to play like music. And defense is a huge, huge part of that. Everybody's got to do their job, or one failed misassignment or one guy not doing things technically the way he is supposed to blows up everything for everybody. But last year, you truly got to see the total Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah experience, totally confident in what he's doing, totally comfortable in his role, and also understanding and accepting that the players he's playing with are going to do their roles as well, which leads to a guy getting 20 tackles for loss last season. It's not going to be very long. If players are supposed to be there by Monday or Tuesday, I'd be stunned if we do not hear about a Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah extension before this week is out.
All right, before I let you go, Browns bring back loaded defensive unit. We've kind of alluded to this. There's an off-season signing that deserves a little bit more chatter. This is from the Locked On Browns podcast that you host. And we alluded to it, Jordan Hicks. The one thing you overlook it, 5 straight years of 100 tackles. That doesn't happen by mistake.
Well, you look at it, right off the bat, you assume that between he and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, that is 125 tackles. And, Jordan Hicks is a pretty effective blitzer. He's had plenty of interceptions. He had plenty of fumble recoveries. He's always around the ball. So now you have a guy like JOK who has the ability to blow up these plays and make these plays. And then these, when you get those things that are blowing up 2-3 yards in the backfield, a lot of times when those things result in turnovers, and you have a guy who has a smart nose for the ball, it's going to be a really, really fun duo. Hicks is a better athlete, better player, certainly better production than both Sione Takitaki and Anthony Walker. The room has gotten, I don't know if you want to say between Hicks and JOK, certainly has gotten better. But once you get outside of that, Tony Fields, we haven't seen a lot of him, but you wonder what we've seen of Tony Fields? This guy made plays. Huge game 2 years ago in Houston. Huge play in the end zone last year in Indianapolis. Diabate was an athletic freak. The young guy, Charlie Thomas, who barely got to play last year, athletic freak out of Georgia Tech. Bookie Watson, say whatever you want. He was the defensive player of the year in the Southeastern Conference last year. So this guy knows how to play football. It's weird. The Browns have a really, really good linebacker room for a team that ideally wants to get to nickel and dime as fast as possible. But the Browns have a bunch of solid linebackers on their roster right now.
Jeff Lloyd, Locked On Browns podcast, is always great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Jeff.
All the best, guys. Next week, let's go.
Sounds good. Jeff Lloyd, make sure you check him out. Locked On Browns podcast. Always really good Browns coverage. We're going to step aside. We continue talking Browns. Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Straight ahead on Sports4CLE. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program is dedicated to recognizing exceptional students, teachers, and schools throughout Ohio. Scan the QR code on screen to nominate students and teachers as Academic All-Stars and Teachers of the Month. They must be currently enrolled or teach in grades K through 12. Is your K through 12 school developing students' literacy skills to achieve success in reading? If so, you can nominate your school for the School of the Year. Students can win $100, teachers can win $500, and schools can win $2,500. Scan the QR code, fill out the forms, and nominate deserving students, teachers, and schools today. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program takes pride in honoring exceptional students, teachers, and schools across Ohio. Submit your nomination today. It's fun, fast, and free. We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Good morning, gentlemen. This is Jim from Rochester. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the shout-out the other day. Nice that finally somebody recognized us as being supporters of the Browns. As for comments about Browns being a Super Bowl contender, in the beginning, when the season starts, all 32 teams are contenders. It's not who begins the race, it's who crosses the finish line, and that's never us. Also, the game is still tough, despite what anybody might say. To play it, you got to be rough and tough. And as far as discipline goes, I've seen many of coaches still discipline their players on the sidelines. Our two-time coach of the year, what's he do? He gives them 2 plays off. Are you kidding me? What is this, Pop Warner?
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. And Fred, relative to discipline, we aren't even the beat reporters aren't privy to how Kevin Stefanski handles discipline. They always say they keep it in-house. Relative to, this isn't an era where coaches get in players' faces. And I mean, look at it. Bill Belichick doesn't do that. It's not the 80s when Mike Ditka used to do that. It's a different, I mean, McVay, you can go right down the list. All of the guys that are recognized as really good head coaches, we don't know how they discipline their players, is the truth of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all I can do is go by what I hear, that Kevin Stefanski takes care of business. The players respect him and they follow him basically because he's proven that he's been able to win games. I mean, he's had a couple of years with COVID and injuries and at quarterback and still been able to navigate choppy waters. And the players tell me they respect him. I don't think he's the throw the trash can, kick the cat, throw things around like maybe the old school, but it is a different era, Dave. many of these players are making 10 times the money the coach is, and it's kind of hard to tell, when they're sitting there, what are you telling me? You know, what I make type of a thing. So I think he commands the respect, and the players, that's all you can go by. And if you win, they follow you. If you lose, you start, you know, not being listened to. But 2 times out of 4 years, coach of the year, 2 playoffs, um, going through some choppy waters with injuries at quarterback twice, and still, having a winning record after 4 years. It's a low bar, but the Browns haven't had any coach with a winning record, unless you throw Greg Williams's half a season since the team returned. So, yeah, I mean, and I think the positive is he's never been a head coach until he came to the Browns. So these are his first 4 years. So he's got to be learning and getting better. He's just 42 years old now. And, you have to think that just like players get better, the more they played and experience, I think he's learned from some mistakes, and he's only going to get better. So I don't think his demeanor is to be a kick the wall type guy, but I still think that you can be respected, with firmness. And like I said, we don't know what's going on in the locker room, other than what we're being told by the players.
Yeah, and you bring up a valid point. You mentioned 10 times more. A lot of these guys are earning 100, 200, $1 million. So yelling and screaming at them, it's, they're going to respond by saying, I'm not a child. Don't treat me like one. And that's just the reality of coaching professional sports. It's not just football players. It's basketball players. It's baseball players. They are, for lack of a better term, a company, and you need to treat them and have their respect. Let's get into some of the articles that you've written. Defensive tackle analysis. Do you think the defensive tackles can be a strength of this defense?
Well, I think maybe they don't have the star power per se that defensive end, or cornerbacks or something. But I think the whole group of defensive tackles, if they're healthy, can be, because of the depth and the rotation. I mean, you look right now, Dalvin Tomlinson and Quentin Jefferson probably at the top of the depth chart. And you have Shelby Harris right there, Maurice Hurst, your top pick, Michael Hall, and a young guy last year, 3rd-round pick, Siaki Ika. So you got 6 guys that legitimately have the credentials to be top, players. And if you can get them all contributing, but get them all fresh, I mean, I really think that you might have a strength there, instead of having only one star player. You might not have the one star guy like a Myles Garrett, but you have, it looks like as a group, a lot of depth and a lot of strength. And if that interior can really continue to get better, because on defense, stopping the run, they started good at the beginning of the year, fell off towards the year end. I think they finished about 12th against the run. And if those guys can help, shore that up, maybe get in the top 10 against the rush, but more than anything, prevent or cause some penetration from the interior. You're getting most of your pass rush from Myles Garrett, Zadarius Smith, Okoronkwo. But now if you could get some presence inside with Jefferson and Mike Hall and even Tomlinson, and with the other ones, I think that can go a long way in freeing up even the edge rushers all the more.
Yeah, and think back just 2 years, how much of a weakness defensive tackle was. That certainly has improved dramatically. Another article you wrote for the Orange and Brown Report, linebacker analysis. Can Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah continue kind of his Pro Bowl play, do you think?
Well, I really think that he's really a shining star, kind of ascending. Last year, he didn't play really all 3 downs until the second half of the season. And I know you can't go by stats totally, but in his first 2 years, he had 10 tackles for loss. Last year, he had 20 tackles for loss himself. If you look on the team's tackle chart, they had many guys that didn't even have 20 tackles for the season. He had 20 for a loss, including 3.5 sacks. I just remember in that playoff game, one of the bright spots was his play. I mean, he was shooting in. When Stroud would throw a screen pass, he'd read it, drop the receiver in the backfield or for a loss. He'd get penetration. I think he really does a good job against mobile quarterbacks. He's done a good job against Lamar Jackson since he's been here. And I just think going into his 4th year, contract year, I think the ceiling is all so much higher. I mean, he was very comfortable in Jim Schwartz's defense last year, and now he's coming into his 2nd year with all the confidence in the world. If he can stay healthy, I really think he can become, a perennial Pro Bowl. I know he went to the Pro Bowl kind of as an alternate last year, but I think really he can be, right there at the top of the chart, in the NFL and linebacker play for what he does.
All right, before we go to break, another article that you wrote for the Orange and Brown Report, cornerback analysis, and I find this one really interesting. Could M.J. Emerson, Greg Newsome join Denzel Ward as potential Pro Bowl players?
I think it would be tough for all 3 of them, but I do think Emerson is on the cusp. He's getting a lot of recognition around the league. He's had some problems, maybe getting penalties, using his hands and getting called, but he's really aggressive and he's really played well in his first 2 years. And so when you think of a guy that's playing well in their first 2 years, and then he spent this offseason, shadowing Denzel Ward. Ward talked about him, being with him, learning how he trained in the offseason, learning his habits. And here's a guy who really wants to be good. And so I really think he has a chance to be a Pro Bowler this year. Newsome, I think, has a lot to prove. He got the 5th-year option picked up, but I think he wants a long-term extension, obviously. And, he's played well, but he was exposed in the playoff game, as several guys were. But I think he's got to do a little better job, in his man-to-man coverage, and he's going to get that opportunity this year. But certainly, if the Browns are successful, particularly on defense, they're going to get recognized for it. And I think the cornerbacks, beside Ward, I think either Newsome or Emerson or both of them will get some recognition.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now I can step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll talk a little Amari Cooper. We head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. We'll be right back.
Believe this new $1,000 tax-free scratch-off? 18,000 $1,000 winners? Another winner? Good thing I brought my check-writing pens. You know what else is winning? My carpal tunnel syndrome. Wouldn't it be great for these guys if they could cash their tickets in online?
They can, with the Ohio Lottery app.
What? That's great! Wait, what's an app?
Attention shoppers, the Ohio Lottery's $1,000 tax-free $20 scratch-off is your best chance ever to win $1,000. And yes, you can cash it in online.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
I see how players end up leaving. They end up being disgruntled and they want to leave. And I know Amari Cooper, he's a veteran. He's not going to be out there like the young whippersnapper getting in trouble and all of that. He's a perfect role model, and I want him here in Cleveland. And hopefully you can spend some time on this and we can get some answers on how the negotiations are going. Thanks again, Dave. I appreciate it.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Fred, I wouldn't get too concerned that we haven't heard anything. Amari and his agent, this time of year is when guys go on vacation before they go to training camp and the grind starts. That, it may be, and I don't know that for a fact, it may be as simple as they haven't done that. You know, we talked earlier about the Dustin Hopkins contract. The way this contract comes down, there will be some steps that get them to an Amari Cooper contract, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, when I take the Hopkins, extension kind of a little different approach, is that the way they restructure, sure, the guy gets 15 million over 3 years, but the first year, it frees up money by doing this. And so I just think, yes, it's a step in repositioning assets to get the contract done with Cooper. There is no way in the world I can see them entering as important of a season as this with your top one of your top 2 or 3 offensive threats and having him going into the season being disgruntled. I just can't see that happening. I just think that as fans, everybody gets a little, excited. And sure, I mean, they go to camp a week from today, tomorrow, and nothing, you don't hear anything. But I think that they'll get this done. I don't know if it'll be the first day of camp or whatever, but I just cannot see them going, any length of time as a holdout. The guy's under contract for, I think, 23 million this year. He's fined every day for not being here. Sure, you can make it up in an extension and so forth, but I just can't see them getting the Browns putting anything in perspective to have him disgruntled or upset. I've been around the guy. I just don't see the personality, of being that type of I've said this many times. I've been around top #1 receivers for over 30 years, covering with the Browns and other teams, and he is not a diva. I mean, he's one of the most down-to-earth guys I've been around. I realize he has an agent, but I just feel like he just knows this is his window to get his last contract. When you hit 30, all of a sudden, it seems like when you're about 32, everybody looks at you as a wide receiver that you fell off the deep end. And then you see the Julio Jones, the DeAndre Hopkins is going 1 year at a time, team to team, in that kind of scenario. And I think he just wants maybe a little bit of security, maybe a 3-year deal. I don't know what he's asking for, and maybe the Browns are asking for a 2-year deal. So I think they'll work this out.
Yeah, and again, this front office has been really good about finding ways to keep players that they want to keep. So you almost have to divorce, what the Browns front office has done before Andrew Berry, because he's kind of earned the benefit of the doubt that way. And they want to keep Amari Cooper, so I'm with you. I think they find a way.
Well, can you think, Dave, I'll say this, can you think of anybody that's left in the last 3 years that everybody wanted, that was the top ticket and they let get away?
Not one. And that's why I have every confidence that Andrew Berry they'll find the sweet spot that keeps Amari Cooper happy and that they can live with financially. Take a look at this. This is what the Browns want to avoid. Brandon Ayuk has officially requested a trade after an offseason of unsuccessful attempts to reach an extension despite a recent meeting. Niners haven't been willing to engage in negotiations since May, so Ayuk has respectfully asked out. And who knows how that's going to end up, but that's what the Browns want to avoid. That right there.
Yeah, and I'll give you just a couple short years ago, the Browns had a guy named David Njoku who asked to be traded after Austin Hooper was signed as a free agent. Browns said, well, we respectfully are not going to trade you. And you see what happened. They moved on from everybody else and made Njoku the main guy. So, I'm not putting the 49ers situation with this, but with the 49ers, they really can. I believe he's under contract.
Yeah.
And so, if he wants to play this year, that's where he's going to play. I don't know. But yeah, the Browns want to avoid that situation. I just cannot believe it would get to that point. Jimmy Haslam has been spending almost unheard of amounts of money, like about $50 million more in cash bonuses up front than any other NFL team. in recent years, and that's why the Browns have been able to have more players getting over 10 million than any team in the NFL right now, I believe. And so I just can't believe that they would let something like that go. It's not like you have Deebo Samuel and your number one pick and all these other guys. You got Amari Cooper's really the only proven wide receiver you have. The other ones are potential. Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, they're potential. Cedric Tillman, they're not going to let him go for nothing.
All right, before we go to break, this one from Fox Sports, burning questions for 2024. Which team will be the biggest disappointment of 2024? And they say the Browns. Way their schedule is set up, Browns could get off to a fast start. It will likely only be fool's gold. This team isn't bad, but it's headed for a regression back towards 500, maybe even on the wrong side of 8 and 9. Oh, I disagree with that, Fred. Here's the thing. They started 4 different quarterbacks, 5 if you want to count Jeff Driscoll. I don't think turnovers are kind of a fluky thing. They had more than their share of turnovers. If both of those regress the other way, in other words, quarterbacks stay healthy, linemen stay healthy a little bit more, and they don't turn the ball over as much, I think they win the AFC North. Not only do I not think they're 8 and 9.
I think the key is it is with so much in NFL is injuries. But when you look at this team, their defense, they were ranked at the top, number 1. Statistically, I look more at how many points given up. Sometimes points given up can be deceiving because maybe a turnover gives the opponent a short field, but they just need, if they can hold their opponent to 20 points or less, somewhere in that neighborhood, I think this offense is good enough to outscore a lot of the teams. They have a tougher schedule because of their record last year. And in this division, I can tell you, I could make a case for any of the 4 teams to win the division. I could make a case for any of the 4 teams to be in last place. There are factors. The biggest one is the injury factor, but the number one is to their quarterback. Deshaun Watson needs to stay on the field. He needs to play. And if he plays average or above average with this defense, I believe they'll be able to outscore their opponents enough to get to the playoffs. Now, anything else is a fool's errand. You take Joe Burrow out of the Bengals, and they're a sub 500 or a 9-8 team like they were last year. Same thing could be said about Lamar Jackson. Same thing could be said pretty much about the Browns or the Steelers. So you take all things being equal. I think that the defense will keep the Browns competitive. They have a good kicker. It's all about the offense being able to score, 20 points or more a game. And if they do that, I think they'll be fine. But I don't agree that they're going to be, very disappointing. They do need to get off to a good start because they do have a second half. But it's all about the AFC North. You got those 6 games in the AFC North that could make or break your season. That's over a third of the season is in your division, and they're all good teams. So you just it's what you're going to do with that. So nobody really knows, but I think injuries, like always, are big. But if you can tell me your key guys are going to be on the field all season, I think the Browns are going to be right there competing for the AFC North.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. Now going to take one more time out, other side of the break. Biggest questions for the Browns heading into training camp. Sports4CLE. I'll be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Fred Greetham, senior analyst for the Orange and Brown Report. So this one's from Pro Football Network. The biggest questions for the Browns heading into training camp. Number 1, How will Deshaun Watson look coming back from his shoulder injury? Number 2, how will Nick Chubb look coming back from his season-ending knee injury? And how will Jerry Jeudy fit into the offense? Fred, those are all important questions, but I'm with you. The number one thing is Deshaun Watson. They have to find a way, 1, to keep him on the field, 2, to make him more comfortable. I think they didn't tailor the offense around Deshaun Watson the last 2 years. I think they have consciously tried to do that, or I think they are going to consciously try to do that. That's the reason for all the offensive staff changes.
Well, yeah, take back his first year, the first 11 games, he was suspended. And when he came back, he had 6 games. So they really had to just kind of tailor it on the fly, because with Jacoby Brissett, they were trying to put themselves in position to have a chance to make the playoffs. And then they, changed on the fly for the final 6 games. Wasn't that great? That was with Alex Van Pelt. They spent the whole offseason the next year getting ready for Watson, and it really never got going because of the injury bug and so forth. In the 3rd game, Watson got hurt, and the rest of the year was kind of up and down with him. They moved on from Van Pelt, and I think they saw enough that it really wasn't working what they wanted, so they went out to get Ken Dorsey and bring in more of the spread offense, the choice routes, the running out of shotgun, kind of what Josh Allen was doing with Buffalo, what Cam Newton did when he was successful in Carolina. Dorsey had used both of those and worked with both those. So I think what they're trying to do is really tailor-make this more to what Watson was doing when he went to the Pro Bowl 3 times with the Texans in Houston. More of a quick, get the ball out, quick read, get the ball out, and use his mobility. And so we'll see if it pays off. It definitely didn't show like it was in his first 2 years here for different reasons. So I think didn't really see enough in the offseason other than the last mini camp. I think the last practice, he uncorked about a 50-yarder. So I think he's healthy with his arm. I think more than anything, he just needs to have that confidence and that swag when he goes out there that he can make things happen. But more importantly, he doesn't have to do it all on his own. I think so many times he feels or has felt the pressure that he has to be the franchise savior right now. And the Browns have enough good players on offense, let alone the defense. He doesn't have to. And so I just think that's a question. It's going to be the biggest question is how he responds and how he heads into the season. But Nick Chubb, I don't think anybody knows. I mean, it's very encouraging to see him, whatever, squat 540 pounds. I mean, good night. I know he did over 600, but coming off that injury, I'm more interested in how he runs the football. And I don't want him, I don't want them to push him at all. I want him 100% or as close to it before he's out there, so he's totally confident. And then Jerry Jeudy, I mean, he was the biggest move they made this offseason. They're counting on him really being a big playmaker to take some of the pressure off Njoku and Cooper and the running game. So those are big questions all the way around. But a lot of them, like anything, is the injury status, of those guys, Watson, Chubb, and the top 3 tackles. We're pretty sure Jones is ready to go. But what about Conklin and Jedrick Wills? Are they ready to go, and are they going to be, top of their game? So there's still a lot of questions, but we'll start getting the answers that a week from now, and it's football season for sure.
You mentioned it. So next week, end of next week, middle to end of next week, they'll be in the Greenbrier. What are you going to pay? 2 things. What are you going to pay closest attention to out at training camp, and what would you feel good about seeing if the Browns get this done? It should be good things ahead during training camp.
Well, I think number one is the health. I mean, this roster's strong. I mean, but you have some questions, guys coming off injury, but barring unforeseen injuries, I think that the sky's the limit. But what I'm going to look at is some of the depth. You know, I'm a little unsure about their backup behind Njoku at tight end, a little bit about their backup linebackers behind JOK and Jordan Hicks. I want to see what Devin Bush looks like. I want to see what the rookie Watson looks like. You know, the insight, Michael Hall, see how he fits in. I'm very confident in Jim Schwartz in his second year is a silver lining. The way they got blown out by the Texans, I think that's going to leave a big motivating factor for Schwartz and reminding the defensive players, most of them coming back, that were in that game, that you cannot rest on your laurels. You look terrible, and I just think that will be – I'm confident that Schwartz will have that defense ready. On offense, I think the big thing is how's it going to look. Last year at Greenbrier, to be honest, I thought the offense looked pretty good, but they were just going against one another, and then we really never saw the Elijah Moore experiment take off. You know, it looked like they were going to use him everywhere. They tried at the beginning of the season, didn't really work, and they kind of scrapped it. So it's all the way around. I'm looking for the Ken Dorsey stamp on this offense to see what it looks like playing out of the shotgun and how Deshaun Watson looks. And obviously Nick Chubb, you know what shape's he in? Is he going to start on the PUP list, or are they going to actually have him start practicing from the beginning? A lot of questions, but it'll be exciting. Always is. There's always questions you didn't know about that pop up. You know, there's always guys that don't start camp not practicing that are kind of, you didn't know that, and you're like, what's wrong with them? And then, oh, now you got to see the adjustment. So follow along. We'll be there every day to recap what's going on. So it will be an adventure. And once they start next week, it's pretty much 6-8 months, you know, nonstop.
The other thing is I would expect sometime pretty early in that, I'm hoping, they get the Amari Cooper contract situation to iron out too.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't want a dark cloud going into an important season like this. That's why I think it'll get done, but it does take two sides, you know, to get it worked out. But I would really be scratching my head if they don't have Cooper, you know, situated and get that behind them. Very camp.
Fred Greetham, senior analyst from the Orange and Brown Report. As always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Fred.
Thanks for having me on, Dave.
Fred,
great time.
All right, Fred Greetham. Make sure you check him out. Orange and Brown Report. As he told you, he'll be in Greenbrier the entire length of the Browns stay. Always really good Browns coverage. Check him out, the Orange and Brown Report. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We will see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.